On March 12, 2023, the tranquil Sunday afternoon in Oak Cliff, a residential neighborhood in Dallas, Texas, was disrupted by the sound of sirens. Police officers responded to an emergency call from a residence on Maple Avenue, where a domestic dispute had reportedly escalated into violence. The caller identified himself as Blake Turner, a 34-year-old nurse at Dallas Methodist Hospital. When officers arrived at the modest two-story home, they found Blake sitting on the front steps, visibly shaken. His left eye was swollen, with a laceration above his eyebrow that had been hastily bandaged. Defensive wounds marked his forearms, consistent with someone who had raised their arms to protect themselves from an attack. Inside the house, officers encountered Meredith Turner, Blake's wife of 18 months. At 32 years old, Meredith worked as an administrative assistant at Pearson & Walsh, a prestigious law firm in downtown Dallas. She appeared disoriented and smelled strongly of alcohol. When questioned by responding officers, Meredith claimed she had no recollection of any altercation. "I don't know what he's talking about," she repeatedly stated, her speech slurred. "I just came home from having drinks with friends." The initial police report documented the scene meticulously. The living room showed signs of a disturbance: an overturned coffee table, a broken vase, and scattered photographs. A wine bottle lay empty on the kitchen counter, alongside a half-empty bottle of bourbon. Officers noted that Meredith's behavior oscillated between confusion and agitation as they attempted to question her. Officer Sarah Ramirez, the first responder who filed the report, wrote, "Subject appears heavily intoxicated, exhibiting mood swings and inconsistent statements. Claims no memory of the incident, despite physical evidence suggesting a recent altercation." Blake, still trembling as paramedics examined his wounds, provided his statement. He explained that Meredith had gone out with colleagues around 3 p.m. for what was supposed to be a brief happy hour celebration of a co-worker's promotion. When she hadn't returned by 9 p.m., he had texted her several times without response. Meredith finally arrived home shortly after 10 p.m., visibly intoxicated and immediately confrontational. According to Blake's statement, the situation escalated when Meredith noticed his wallet open on the entryway table. Inside was a family photograph Blake kept with him, a picture of his parents, grandparents, and siblings at a family reunion the previous summer. Blake explained to the officers that this seemed to trigger something in Meredith. Her demeanor changed dramatically. "She just stared at the photo for what felt like forever," Blake told the officers. "Then she looked at me like she'd never seen me before and started screaming." The body camera footage from Officer Ramirez captured Blake's visible distress as he recounted what happened next. "She started calling me names, racial slurs. She kept saying she'd been tricked and deceived. I didn't understand what was happening. We've been married for over a year." As Blake continued his statement, the disturbing reality of the situation began to emerge. Blake Turner, who has a light complexion due to his mixed heritage, explained that Meredith had apparently never realized or acknowledged that he was African American. The family photo in his wallet, showing his darker-skinned family members, had somehow triggered her violent reaction. "She just kept screaming, 'You're black? You're actually black!'" Blake recounted, his voice breaking. "Then she started throwing things at me. The vase hit me first, then she came at me swinging." Based on the evidence and Blake's statement, officers placed Meredith Turner under arrest for domestic assault. As they escorted her to the patrol car, body cam footage captured her continuing to feign confusion, repeatedly stating she couldn't remember anything and asking why she was being arrested. At the Dallas County Detention Center, Meredith's blood alcohol content was measured at 0.19, more than twice the legal driving limit. She was processed and held overnight pending arraignment. The booking officer noted in his report that Meredith became increasingly agitated as she sobered up, demanding to call her supervisor at the law firm rather than legal representation. Detective Nathan Reeves from the Domestic Violence Unit was assigned to the case the following morning. With 15 years of experience investigating domestic incidents, something about this case immediately struck him as unusual. While alcohol-fueled domestic violence wasn't uncommon, the specific trigger and Meredith's reaction suggested deeper issues that warranted further investigation. Reeves began by interviewing Blake at the hospital, where he was receiving stitches for the laceration above his eye. The detective was particularly interested in understanding the couple's history and how such a fundamental fact about Blake's identity could have remained unacknowledged in their relationship. "We met online," Blake explained, his voice quiet as a nurse finished bandaging his wounds. "On a dating app. We texted for a few weeks before meeting in person. I guess my profile pictures were mostly just me, not family photos. When Detective Reeves asked if Meredith had ever met his family, Blake's response raised the first red flag in what would become an increasingly disturbing investigation. She always had an excuse whenever I suggested meeting my parents or siblings, Blake said. Work conflicts, not feeling well, something always came up. After a while, I stopped pushing it. I thought maybe she was just nervous about meeting them. The detective reviewed the couple's marriage certificate, noting they had wed after only 6 months of dating, a relatively short courtship. Blake explained that Meredith had been eager to get married quickly, suggesting a courthouse ceremony rather than a traditional wedding with family present. Looking back now, Blake said, his voice hollow with realization, I can see all the ways she kept our lives separate. She never wanted to post pictures of us together on social media. She introduced me to her work friends, but always at restaurants, never at gatherings where other people's families would be present. As Detective Reeves continued his preliminary investigation, he obtained a warrant to examine both Blake's and Meredith's phones. The contents would prove crucial to understanding the true nature of what had transpired in the Turner household and would uncover a disturbing pattern that extended far beyond a single drunken outburst. Meanwhile, at her arraignment the following day, Meredith Turner appeared composed and sober, dressed in clothes brought by a co-worker. She pleaded not guilty to the domestic assault charge, with her court-appointed attorney arguing that the incident was an alcohol-induced misunderstanding with no malicious intent. Judge Caroline Weston, however, noted the severity of Blake's injuries and Meredith's apparent attempt to mislead responding officers. She set bail at $50,000 and issued a temporary restraining order, preventing Meredith from contacting Blake or returning to their shared home. As Meredith was led from the courtroom, Detective Reeves watched her carefully. The woman's demeanor had completely transformed from the confused, allegedly amnesiac person depicted in the body camera footage. She now appeared calculating and controlled, whispering intently to her attorney and shooting cold glances toward the detective. Reeves had seen this behavior before, the quick shift from claiming incapacity to strategic planning. It reinforced his suspicion that there was more to uncover about Meredith Turner and her relationship with her husband. Back at the station, the detective began creating a timeline of the Turners' relationship, from their first online interaction to the violent incident. He requested access to their dating app communications, employment records, and social media history. If Meredith's attack was indeed motivated by a sudden discovery of Blake's racial identity, Reeves needed to understand how such information had remained concealed or perhaps deliberately ignored throughout their relationship. What began as a seemingly straightforward case of alcohol-fueled domestic violence was evolving into something far more complex and disturbing. As Detective Reeves compiled his initial report that evening, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had only scratched the surface of the Turner case. What he would discover in the coming days about Meredith Turner's past, her carefully constructed personal life, and her previously hidden communications would reveal a pattern of deception and prejudice that extended far beyond her marriage, a pattern that would shock even veteran investigators and ultimately expose a calculated facade that had finally crumbled on that fateful night in Oak Cliff. Detective Nathan Reeves arrived at the Dallas County Prosecutor's Office with a thick file tucked under his arm. It had been 5 days since the incident at the Turner residence, and what he had uncovered painted a disturbing picture of calculated deception rather than a momentary alcohol-induced outburst. The digital evidence is compelling, Reeves explained to Assistant District Attorney Vanessa Ortiz, spreading documents across her desk. Meredith Turner's phone contained over 2 years of messages with a friend named Tanya Reed. The content reveals an extensive pattern of racist views and deliberate concealment of her husband's racial background. Ortiz reviewed the transcripts, her expression darkening as she read through the exchanges. In messages dating back to before the marriage, Meredith had described Blake to Tanya as her ambiguously ethnic boyfriend and joked about how his exotic look would give her attractive mixed-race children without dealing with a fully black man. This suggests premeditation, Ortiz noted, setting down the papers. She knew of his heritage but chose to ignore or minimize it. The assault wasn't triggered by discovery, but by confirmation she could no longer deny. The investigation had revealed that Blake and Meredith's relationship had begun on an exclusive dating app called Elite Connect in January 2021. Their early communications showed no explicit discussion of racial background, though Blake had never concealed his identity. His profile had mentioned growing up in a predominantly African-American neighborhood in Houston and included references to his involvement in black student organizations during college. Interviews with Blake's family members painted a picture of increasing isolation. His cousin, Wesley Parker, provided a statement describing how Blake's relationship with his family had changed after meeting Meredith. Blake used to come to every family gathering, Wesley told Detective Reeves. After he started dating Meredith, he began making excuses. When we did see him, it was always alone, never with her. He'd say she had work commitments or wasn't feeling well. Eventually, we started wondering if she even existed. The investigation uncovered that during their 18 months of marriage, Meredith had successfully avoided meeting Blake's family entirely. She had claimed allergies during Thanksgiving, scheduled a work retreat during Christmas, and fabricated a dental emergency to miss Blake's grandmother's 80th birthday celebration. Particularly damning was evidence from Meredith's workplace. Vanessa Lowe, a paralegal who worked alongside Meredith at Pearson & Walsh, provided investigators with recordings of workplace conversations. As part of an unrelated workplace harassment case, Lowe had begun documenting inappropriate comments made in the office 6 months earlier. "I never expected Meredith would be relevant to any investigation," Lowe explained during her interview, "but she would make these comments during lunch or when she thought only certain people could hear, comments about not wanting to live in certain neighborhoods because they were too urban, or complaining about clients with difficult names. It was always coded language, but the meaning was clear." One recording from February 2023, just a month before the assault, captured Meredith on a lunch break with colleagues. When asked about her husband, she had described Blake as Mediterranean-looking and changed the subject when someone asked about his family background. The digital forensics team made another crucial discovery when analyzing the couple's online presence. While Blake's social media accounts featured numerous family photos and clear references to his cultural background, Meredith had carefully curated their online image as a couple. In the few photos she had posted of them together, the lighting and filters had been adjusted to minimize differences in their skin tone. More tellingly, she had untagged herself from photos Blake posted that included his family members. Financial records revealed another layer of separation. Despite being married, Meredith had maintained entirely separate finances and had insisted on a prenuptial agreement that Detective Reeves found unusually specific about property division. "It's like she was planning an exit strategy from the beginning," he noted to ADA Ortiz. Perhaps most revealing was what investigators found when they executed a search warrant on a storage unit rented in Meredith's name. Inside was a collection of personal items from her past that she had removed from their shared home, including college yearbooks and photographs that showed her association with campus groups known for controversial positions on racial issues. One photo showed a younger Meredith at a party where attendees were dressed in costumes with clear racial stereotypes. Another contained handwritten notes from a former boyfriend with explicitly racist language that Meredith had apparently kept as mementos. The evidence painted a picture of someone who had deliberately constructed a relationship based on denial and deception. Blake, interviewed again 3 days after the incident, appeared increasingly devastated as detectives sensitively revealed what they had discovered. "I knew her family was conservative," he said, his voice hollow with disbelief. "She told me they were old-fashioned and might need time to accept our relationship. I never thought she was hiding me because of my race." Blake provided investigators with additional context about their whirlwind courtship and quick marriage. Meredith had been the one to suggest moving in together after just 3 months, and she had proposed marriage herself at the 5-month mark. "She always seemed in a hurry to cement our relationship," Blake recalled. "Now I wonder if it was because she didn't want me looking too closely at who she really was." On the morning of March 17th, 5 days after the assault, Ada Ortiz made the decision to upgrade the charges against Meredith Turner. In addition to domestic assault, Meredith would now face charges of committing a hate crime, a significant enhancement that reflected the evidence of racial motivation behind the attack. When informed of the upgraded charges, Meredith's court-appointed attorney immediately requested a meeting with the prosecutor to discuss a potential plea arrangement. This sudden shift in strategy suggested recognition of the strength of the evidence against his client. As Detective Reeves compiled his comprehensive report, a disturbing timeline emerged. The marriage between Blake and Meredith Turner appeared to have been built on a foundation of deliberate misrepresentations and carefully maintained boundaries designed to compartmentalize Blake from any context that would explicitly highlight his racial identity. The detective couldn't help but wonder about Meredith's ultimate plan. The evidence suggested that she had recognized Blake's racial background from the beginning, but had chosen to ignore it, perhaps constructing a narrative in her mind that minimized his blackness while exploiting what she had callously referred to in messages as his exotic appeal. The intoxication on the night of the assault hadn't created her racist views. It had merely stripped away the facade she had carefully maintained. The alcohol had removed her inhibitions, bringing to the surface the prejudices she normally kept hidden behind a veneer of tolerance. As the case against Meredith Turner continued to build, investigators turned their attention to the security cameras that Blake had installed in their home the previous year after a series of break-ins in the neighborhood. The footage from the night of the incident would provide irrefutable evidence of exactly what had transpired when Meredith returned home that evening, evidence that would prove crucial in the prosecutor's case and would reveal the moment when Meredith's carefully constructed facade finally shattered completely. The security footage from the Turner residence proved to be the most compelling evidence in the case against Meredith Turner. Detective Reeves and ADA Ortiz sat silently in the dimly lit viewing room at the Dallas County Prosecutor's Office, watching the events of March 12th unfold with crystal clarity on the monitor before them. The timestamp on the footage showed 10:17 p.m. when Meredith stumbled through the front door. The home security system had captured multiple angles of the ensuing confrontation from cameras installed in the entryway, living room, and kitchen. The video quality was surprisingly good. Blake had invested in a high-end system following a series of break-ins in the neighborhood the previous summer. "She doesn't look nearly as intoxicated as she claimed to be," Ortiz observed, watching Meredith navigate the entryway with only slight unsteadiness. "She's functioning well enough to put down her purse and remove her jacket without issue." The footage showed Blake emerging from the kitchen, visibly relieved at his wife's return. There was no audio, but his body language, the way he approached with open arms before stopping, seeming to ask a question, suggested concern rather than confrontation. Meredith's response was dismissive. She waved him off and moved toward the kitchen, where she poured herself another drink. What happened next was precisely as Blake had described in his statement. Meredith noticed his wallet on the entryway table and paused. She picked it up, opened it, and removed something, the family photograph, though this wasn't visible on camera. For nearly 30 seconds, she stood motionless, staring at whatever she held in her hands. "That's the moment," Reeves said quietly. "Watch her body language change completely." The transformation was unmistakable. Meredith's posture stiffened, her head snapping up to look toward Blake off camera. When she moved back into frame, her expression had contorted into something unrecognizable. Rage, disgust, shock, all mingled together. She was shouting now, gesturing wildly with the photograph still clutched in her hand. Blake reappeared in the frame, his hands raised in a placating gesture, clearly trying to calm the situation. Meredith's response was to throw her drink at him, the glass shattering against the wall. What followed was a brutal 3-minute assault, with Meredith grabbing items from nearby surfaces, a vase, a framed picture, even a small decorative statue, and hurling them at Blake. When she ran out of projectiles, she physically attacked him, slapping and clawing at his face while he tried to restrain her without causing harm. The most damning moment came when Blake managed to hold her wrists to prevent further blows. Clear as day, even without audio, Meredith could be seen shouting directly into his face, the words unmistakable even to someone with basic lip-reading skills. "You're black? You're actually black?" The words Meredith had screamed were exactly as Blake had reported, followed by a string of racial slurs that made both Ortiz and Reeves wince. "No claiming alcohol-induced amnesia after seeing this," Ortiz noted grimly, pausing the footage. She knew exactly what she was saying and doing. The technical analyst who had enhanced the video confirmed that lip-reading experts had verified the content of Meredith's tirade with 92% confidence. Combined with Blake's testimony and the text messages recovered from Meredith's phone, it created an airtight case for the hate crime enhancement. The security footage also contradicted another aspect of Meredith's initial statement to police. Far from being confused and disoriented when officers arrived, the video showed her rapidly changing demeanor when the police were called. In the moments between Blake's 911 call and the officer's arrival, Meredith could be seen splashing water on her face and deliberately making herself appear more intoxicated than she had been during the assault. She knew what she'd done and was already crafting her defense. Reeves observed. The suddenly slurred speech, the confusion, it was all an act. 2 days after reviewing the security footage, Ada Ortiz called a meeting with Meredith's attorney, Raymond Hicks, who had recently taken over her case from the court-appointed counsel. Hicks, a high-priced defense attorney known for representing employees of Pearson and Walsh, had a reputation for aggressive tactics and media manipulation. "I'm showing you this footage as a professional courtesy," Ortiz told him, playing selected clips from the security cameras. "Your client has been claiming she doesn't remember the incident due to alcohol consumption. As you can see, that defense isn't going to hold up in court." Hicks watched the footage without expression, though his posture grew increasingly rigid as the evidence unfolded before him. When the video ended, he sat in silence for several moments before speaking. "What are you offering?" he asked finally, his tone businesslike. "Given the severity of the assault and the clear evidence of racial motivation, we're prepared to charge Ms. Turner with felony domestic assault with a hate crime enhancement," Ortiz replied. "That carries a potential sentence of up to 10 years. We might consider reducing to a second-degree felony with a mandatory minimum of 4 years if she pleads guilty." Hicks shook his head. "My client has no prior criminal history. She's a respected professional with strong community ties. We'll argue diminished capacity due to intoxication." "The footage clearly shows premeditation and awareness," Ortiz countered, "and we have evidence this wasn't an isolated incident of prejudice. The text messages with Tanya Reid span years and establish a pattern of racist beliefs." The negotiation ended without resolution, with Hicks requesting time to consult with his client. As he gathered his materials to leave, Detective Reeves, who had observed the exchange silently, spoke up. "There's something else you should know," he said. "We've identified 3 previous partners of Ms. Turner, all of whom describe similar behavior, an attraction to men with ambiguous ethnic backgrounds followed by hostility when their non-white heritage was emphasized. 2 have agreed to testify." This new information visibly rattled Hicks, though he maintained his professional composure as he left the meeting. Later that afternoon, he requested another conference with the prosecution team, suggesting his client might be open to discussing a plea agreement after all. Meanwhile, Blake Turner was struggling to rebuild his life in the aftermath of the assault. He had taken a leave of absence from his nursing position at Dallas Methodist Hospital and was staying with his cousin Wesley Parker while he decided whether to return to the home he had shared with Meredith. In an interview with Detective Reeves conducted at Wesley's apartment, Blake revealed more details about his relationship with Meredith that cast the case in an even more disturbing light. "There were signs I ignored," he admitted, staring down at his hands. "Comments she would make about certain neighborhoods or patients I worked with. The way she would tense up when racial issues came up in the news. I made excuses for her, that she was raised differently, that she needed time to understand perspectives outside her own experience." Wesley, sitting nearby, interjected. "We tried to tell him something wasn't right, the way she avoided meeting any of us. I asked him once if she had a problem with black people, and he got defensive, said she was just shy around new people." Blake nodded sadly. "I wanted to believe we had something real, that she loved me for who I am. Now I realize she created a version of me in her mind that wasn't real, one where my blackness could be ignored when inconvenient and fetishized when it suited her." As March turned to April, the case against Meredith Turner continued to build. The prosecutor's office received the full forensic analysis of both Blake's and Meredith's digital footprints, revealing additional evidence of Meredith's careful curation of their relationship online and in person. Perhaps most telling was a series of deleted searches recovered from Meredith's browser history, dating back to the early days of their relationship. How to tell if someone is mixed race, can black people have light skin and straight hair, and most damning, a search from just 2 weeks before their wedding. Legal implications of discovering spouse's race after marriage. This digital trail suggested not only awareness of Blake's racial background, but a calculated decision to proceed with the marriage despite harboring deep-seated prejudices. Perhaps, as one recovered email to Tanya Reid suggested, because she found the idea of passing him off as white or Mediterranean to her family and social circle easier than starting over with someone new after investing months in the relationship. As April 2023 began, with Meredith Turner released on bail but under strict monitoring, the case had evolved from a seemingly straightforward domestic assault into something far more complex, a disturbing chronicle of deception, prejudice, and calculated manipulation that had exploded into violence on that March night when reality could no longer be denied. The security footage that captured that moment of violent truth would prove central to the prosecution's case. But as investigators would soon discover through additional witness testimonies, the facade of Meredith Turner's life extended far beyond her marriage, revealing a pattern of behavior that had left a trail of damaged relationships and hidden prejudices throughout her personal and professional life. By mid-April, as the case against Meredith Turner progressed toward trial, Detective Reeves had assembled a comprehensive network of witnesses whose testimonies painted a disturbing portrait of calculated deception extending far beyond the Turner marriage. Wesley Parker's formal deposition, taken on April 14th at the Dallas County Courthouse, provided crucial context about the relationship dynamics between Blake and his family during the marriage. The first time Blake mentioned Meredith, he seemed excited but nervous, Wesley testified, his expression somber as he recounted events from 2 years earlier. He showed us her picture and talked about how they met online. I remember asking when we'd get to meet her, and he said she was busy with a big case at her firm. According to Wesley, the pattern of Meredith's absences quickly became suspicious to family members. After the third or fourth family gathering Blake attended alone, my mother, Blake's aunt, asked him directly if everything was okay. He got defensive, saying Meredith worked long hours and needed her weekends to decompress. The deposition transcript revealed a pivotal moment approximately 8 months into Blake and Meredith's relationship, during planning for a family reunion in Houston. Blake initially said they'd both attend, Wesley continued. He was excited to introduce her to everyone. Then, 3 days before the event, he called to say Meredith had a work emergency and couldn't make it. When he arrived alone, he seemed different, withdrawn, making excuses to leave early. Wesley described how family members noticed a gradual isolation of Blake from his support network. Before Meredith, Blake called his parents at least twice a week. After they married, those calls became less frequent, always when Meredith wasn't home. At his grandmother's birthday, when he left early, I followed him outside. He admitted Meredith had texted, insisting he come home because she wasn't feeling well. Most significantly, Wesley revealed a conversation that occurred just 2 months before the assault. I finally confronted him. I asked directly if Meredith had a problem with him being black or with his family. He got angry, said I was being divisive, but there was something in his eyes like he'd asked himself the same question. The testimony of Vanessa Lowe, Meredith's colleague from Pearson & Walsh, proved equally revealing. As a paralegal who had worked alongside Meredith for 3 years, Lowe provided insights into Meredith's professional persona and private comments. Meredith was always careful about her image at the firm, Lowe stated in her April 17th deposition. She knew exactly which partners held which views, and she would adapt her conversation accordingly. With the older, more conservative partners, she'd make subtle comments about maintaining traditional values in the legal profession. With younger associates, she'd present herself as progressive. Lowe described how Meredith's facade occasionally slipped in less formal settings. During a holiday party in 2021, after several drinks, she commented on a new diversity initiative the firm was implementing. She said, and I quote, "It's just for show. They'll hire a few token people, put their pictures on the website, and nothing will really change." When challenged by another colleague, she quickly backtracked, claiming she was just being cynical about management, not the initiative itself. The most damning testimony came from Lowe's recollection of conversations following Blake's one and only visit to Meredith's workplace, approximately 10 months into their marriage. Blake surprised her with lunch one day. She seemed flustered, rushed him to a conference room away from the main office area. The next day, Patricia from accounting mentioned how handsome Meredith's husband was and asked about his background. Meredith said his family was from Southern Europe, maybe Sicily or Greece. When Patricia left, Meredith turned to me and said, "It's easier than explaining his whole mixed heritage. People make assumptions, why correct them?" Lowe's testimony also confirmed that Meredith had deliberately maintained separate personal and professional lives. She never included Blake in work functions where spouses were invited. She always had an excuse. He was working a night shift at the hospital, or he was visiting family in Houston. Once, when pressed by a partner's wife, who wanted to set up a double date, Meredith said Blake had social anxiety and preferred one-on-one interactions. Perhaps the most revealing witnesses were 3 of Meredith's former romantic partners, who each described a pattern of behavior consistent with what Blake had experienced. Julian Alvarez, who had dated Meredith for 6 months in 2018, described in his deposition how Meredith's attitude toward him changed after she met his extended family. "My cousins came to visit from Mexico, and they spoke Spanish around her," Alvarez testified. After they left, Meredith made comments about how I was so much more Mexican around my family. She asked why I didn't act like that around her. Our relationship deteriorated quickly after that. Another ex-boyfriend, Raj Patel, described a similar experience from 2019. "She always commented on how I didn't seem Indian and took it as a compliment. When I invited her to a traditional family celebration, she came but was visibly uncomfortable. Afterwards, she suggested we skip similar events in the future, saying they were too ethnic for her taste." The third former partner, Marcus Chen, had dated Meredith briefly in early 2020, just before she met Blake. On our third date, she asked if I was actually Chinese because I didn't have an accent. When I called her out, she claimed it was a compliment. I ended things immediately. When I saw the news about her arrest, I wasn't surprised. These testimonies established a clear pattern. Meredith was consistently attracted to men of color who she perceived as assimilated or who could pass as white or ethnically ambiguous, but she became uncomfortable or hostile when their cultural or racial identities were expressed or emphasized. As Detective Reeves compiled these testimonies, another crucial witness came forward voluntarily, Dr. Elaine Morgan, a therapist who had briefly treated Meredith in 2019. Though initially bound by confidentiality, Dr. Morgan sought a court order allowing her to testify after learning of the assault charges, citing the duty to warn exception when a patient poses a potential threat. In her carefully worded testimony, approved by the court for limited disclosure, Dr. Morgan revealed that Meredith had sought therapy after the breakup with Raj Patel, claiming she wanted to understand why her relationships kept failing. Without violating the specifics of our sessions, Dr. Morgan testified, "I can state that Ms. Turner exhibited concerning patterns of thought regarding race and identity. She expressed beliefs that suggested she viewed racial characteristics as personality traits that could be accepted or rejected rather than intrinsic aspects of a person's identity." Dr. Morgan further testified that Meredith had discontinued therapy after only 4 sessions when challenged about these beliefs. When I attempted to explore the contradictions in how she viewed her partner's racial identities, she became defensive and claimed I was making everything about race when she just had specific preferences in dating. By late April, the prosecution had assembled 27 witnesses whose combined testimonies revealed a consistent pattern of behavior spanning years. The defense team, recognizing the mounting evidence, shifted strategy from claiming alcohol-induced incapacity to suggesting that Meredith suffered from undiagnosed psychological issues that impaired her judgment. Raymond Hicks, Meredith's attorney, filed a motion requesting a psychological evaluation, claiming his client's behavior stemmed from deep-seated identity issues and possible cognitive dissonance regarding racial perceptions. The move was widely seen as laying groundwork for a diminished capacity defense, a tacit acknowledgement that the evidence of premeditation and pattern was too substantial to deny outright. Judge Caroline Weston granted the motion for evaluation, but rejected a request to exclude the security footage from trial, ruling that its probative value outweighed any prejudicial effect. The video evidence is central to establishing the sequence of events and the defendant's state of mind during the alleged assault, she wrote in her April 28th decision. As May approached, with trial scheduled for early June, Blake Turner filed for divorce, citing extreme cruelty and irreconcilable differences. In his filing, he requested restoration of his premarital assets and an expedited proceeding, which Judge Eduardo Sanchez of the Family Court Division granted given the extraordinary circumstances. When approached by the media outside the courthouse after filing the divorce papers, Blake made his only public statement about the case. "This has been a devastating revelation of deception that has forced me to question everything about my marriage. I am focused on healing and moving forward. I ask for privacy during this difficult time." Behind closed doors, prosecutors were preparing for what promised to be one of the most closely watched trials in recent Dallas history, a case that had moved beyond a simple domestic assault to expose uncomfortable truths about the persistence of racial prejudice hidden beneath a veneer of tolerance and acceptance in modern society. As May 2023 began, both the prosecution and defense teams prepared for the trial that would determine Meredith Turner's fate, a trial that would hinge not just on the events of March 12th, but on the years of calculated deception that led to that explosive moment when a carefully constructed facade finally shattered. The Dallas County Courthouse buzzed with tension on the morning of June 5, 2023, as the trial of Meredith Turner officially began. The case had attracted national media attention, with journalists from major networks crowding the courthouse steps. The story, with its explosive combination of domestic violence, racial deception, and privileged entitlement, had struck a nerve in the ongoing national conversation about race relations. Judge Caroline Weston's courtroom was filled to capacity as Raymond Hicks rose to deliver his opening statement for the defense. Dressed in an impeccably tailored navy suit, Hicks projected confidence as he addressed the jury of 8 women and 4 men, whose demographics roughly matched Dallas County's diverse population. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Hicks began, his voice measured and resonant, "this case is not what the prosecution would have you believe. This is not a story of calculated hatred or premeditated violence. This is a tragedy of human frailty, psychological struggle, and the devastating effects of alcohol on an already troubled mind." Hicks paced deliberately before the jury box, establishing eye contact with each juror. "My client Meredith Turner is not a monster. She is a woman who has struggled with complex psychological issues throughout her adult life, issues that went undiagnosed and untreated until this unfortunate incident brought them to light." The defense's strategy quickly became clear. They would concede the basic facts of the assault, while arguing that Meredith's actions stemmed from temporary incapacity due to a combination of intoxication and underlying psychological distress. "The prosecution will show you disturbing footage," Hicks continued. "They will present text messages and testimonies designed to paint my client as calculating and hateful, but what they won't show you is the internal struggle of a woman raised in an environment of racial ignorance who has spent her adult life trying, imperfectly, yes, to overcome those influences." Hicks introduced the jury to the defense's key expert witness, Dr. Lawrence Whitfield, a forensic psychiatrist who had evaluated Meredith following her arrest. Dr. Whitfield will testify that Ms. Turner exhibits signs of identity-based anxiety disorder, a condition that manifests as extreme cognitive dissonance when confronted with situations that challenge her self-perception as an open-minded, tolerant person. The defense argument hinged on portraying Meredith not as deliberately deceptive, but as psychologically incapable of reconciling her attraction to men of color with the prejudices instilled during her conservative upbringing in rural Texas. Ms. Turner did not trick or trap Blake Turner, Hicks asserted. She genuinely loved him and genuinely believed she had moved beyond the prejudices of her upbringing. The tragic events of March 12th represent not a revelation of her true character, but a breakdown of the psychological mechanisms she had constructed to manage her internal conflicts. As Hicks concluded his opening statement, legal analysts watching the proceedings exchanged skeptical glances. The defense strategy represented a significant gamble, essentially admitting to the assault while arguing against the hate crime enhancement by claiming psychological impairment rather than genuine racial animus. Assistant District Attorney Vanessa Ortiz rose next, her dark suit and minimal jewelry projecting professional gravity. Where Hicks had been theatrical and emotive, Ortiz was precise and methodical. "This case is about truth," she began simply. "The truth behind a carefully constructed facade. The truth about a pattern of behavior that culminated in violence on March 12, 2023. Using a tablet to control the courtroom's display screens, Ortiz presented a timeline of Meredith and Blake's relationship, highlighting key moments when Meredith had actively avoided situations that would emphasize Blake's racial identity. "The evidence will show that the defendant didn't simply discover Mr. Turner's race on the night of the assault," Ortiz stated firmly. "She had always known, but had chosen to ignore, minimize, and reinterpret it to suit her preferences. When confronted with irrefutable evidence in the form of a family photograph, her carefully maintained facade collapsed." Ortiz methodically outlined the prosecution's case. The security footage, the testimony from colleagues and former partners establishing a pattern of behavior, and the digital evidence revealing Meredith's awareness of Blake's racial background long before the marriage. "Most tellingly," Ortiz continued, "the defendant's own internet search history will show that just 2 weeks before their wedding, she researched the legal implications of discovering spouse's race after marriage. This was not a woman in denial. This was a woman calculating her options. The first week of trial proceeded with forensic experts analyzing the security footage and blood alcohol content reports. The defense worked to establish that Meredith's BAC of 0.19 would have significantly impaired her judgment and emotional regulation, while the prosecution emphasized that the footage showed far more coordination and awareness than would be expected at such levels. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, the prosecution's toxicology expert, testified that while 0.19 BAC would certainly cause significant impairment, it typically doesn't create new beliefs or prejudices. Rather, it removes inhibitions, allowing pre-existing attitudes to surface more readily. The turning point came on June 9th, when the prosecution played the complete security footage from the Turner residence. Though stills and short clips had been released in pre-trial filings, this was the first time the jury saw the unedited confrontation in its entirety. The courtroom fell silent as the video played, showing Meredith's transformation from mild intoxication to explosive rage upon seeing the family photograph. Several jurors visibly flinched when Meredith began throwing objects at Blake, and one older woman on the jury dabbed at her eyes when Blake could be seen attempting to calm his wife while protecting himself from the assault. Without audio, a forensic lip reader had been called to testify about what was said during the confrontation. Dr. Janet Parsons, a certified forensic linguist, provided a transcript of Meredith's statements captured on video, confirming that she had indeed used racial slurs and had repeatedly expressed shock and disgust at confirmation of Blake's racial background. In cross-examination, Hicks attempted to challenge the accuracy of lip reading as a science, but Dr. Parsons calmly explained the methodology and the confidence levels associated with each transcribed statement. The phrases, "you're black" and "you're actually black" appear multiple times with 95% confidence, she testified. The racial slurs that follow are identified with 92% confidence. When the prosecution called Tanya Reid, Meredith's close friend and confidant, the defense suffered another significant blow. Initially listed as a potential defense witness, Reid had been subpoenaed by the prosecution after attempts to interview her were rebuffed. Clearly uncomfortable on the stand, Reid admitted under oath that Meredith had discussed Blake's race with her multiple times throughout the relationship. She would say things like, "He's technically black, but you wouldn't know it to look at him," Reid testified reluctantly. She liked that he could blend in with her friends from the firm. When presented with text messages where she and Meredith had discussed Blake's appearance, Reid confirmed their authenticity. Yes, she said she liked that he was ethnically ambiguous and that people usually assumed he was Mediterranean or Middle Eastern. The most damaging testimony came when Reid described a conversation that occurred just 1 month before the assault. Meredith mentioned that Blake wanted them to attend his cousin's wedding. She was worried because there would be, in her words, lots of very black relatives there. She asked my advice on how to get out of going, without making it obvious she was uncomfortable. By the end of the first week of trial, the prosecution had established a compelling narrative of deliberate deception and long-standing prejudice. Legal analysts commenting on the case noted that the defense appeared to be struggling to counter the weight of evidence, particularly the testimony from multiple unrelated witnesses who described similar patterns of behavior. As the second week began, the defense presented their expert witness, Dr. Lawrence Whitfield, who testified about Meredith's psychological evaluation. Dr. Whitfield introduced a controversial theory that Meredith suffered from compartmentalization syndrome, allowing her to simultaneously hold contradictory beliefs about race and identity. Miss E. Turner exhibits classic signs of dissociative processing when confronted with information that challenges her self-perception, Dr. Whitfield testified. In layman's terms, she built psychological walls between different aspects of reality to avoid confronting her own contradictions. The prosecution's cross-examination was devastating. Erda Ortiz established that compartmentalization syndrome was not recognized in the DSM-5 or any other standard psychological diagnostic manual, and that Dr. Whitfield had previously testified exclusively for defense teams in similar cases, suggesting a pattern of creating bespoke diagnoses to fit defense narratives. By June 15th, with both sides presenting their closing arguments, the case against Meredith Turner appeared overwhelming. The defense had failed to establish any credible alternative explanation for the pattern of behavior documented through witness testimony, digital evidence, and the security footage. Raymond Hicks made a final impassioned plea to the jury, urging them to consider the complexities of human psychology and the tragedy of a woman trapped between her upbringing and her aspirations. He argued that while Meredith's actions were inexcusable, they represented a perfect storm of intoxication, psychological distress, and genuine confusion about her own feelings. Ada Ortiz's closing argument was characteristically methodical. She systematically dismantled each defense claim, returning repeatedly to the established timeline of Meredith's deliberate avoidance of situations that would emphasize Blake's racial identity. The defense asks you to believe that Ms. Turner was confused, impaired, psychologically compromised, Ortiz told the jury. The evidence shows a woman who knew exactly what she was doing for years, cultivating a relationship where her partner's racial identity could be ignored when inconvenient and fetishized when desired. As the jury began deliberations on the afternoon of June 15th, legal experts predicted a quick verdict, given the strength of the prosecution's case. The question wasn't whether Meredith would be convicted, but whether the jury would accept the hate crime enhancement that would significantly increase her potential sentence. Meanwhile, outside the courtroom, Blake Turner was rebuilding his life. The expedited divorce had been finalized in late May, and he had returned to work at Dallas Methodist Hospital, where colleagues had rallied around him with support. He had declined all interview requests, focusing instead on healing from the psychological trauma of discovering his entire marriage had been built on deception. As Dallas awaited the verdict in the case that had exposed uncomfortable truths about the persistence of racial prejudice beneath a veneer of tolerance, the community grappled with the broader implications of Meredith Turner's double life and what it revealed about the complex reality of race relations in America. After 3 days of deliberation, the jury returned to Courtroom 4B of the Dallas County Courthouse on June 18, 2023. The tension in the room was palpable as Judge Caroline Weston called the court to order. Meredith Turner, dressed in a conservative gray suit, sat rigid beside her attorney, her expression unreadable as the jury foreman stood to deliver the verdict. On the count of felony domestic assault in the first degree, we find the defendant, Meredith Turner, guilty, the foreman stated, his voice clear and steady. On the additional hate crime enhancement, we also find the defendant guilty. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. The decision was unanimous on both counts, a resounding rejection of the defense's claims of psychological impairment and diminished capacity. Meredith showed little visible reaction to the verdict, though her attorney's shoulders slumped slightly. Judge Weston thanked the jury for their service and scheduled sentencing for July 12th, ordering Meredith remanded to custody until that time. As deputies approached to escort her from the courtroom, Meredith finally broke her stoic demeanor, turning to look at the gallery where Blake sat between his cousin Wesley and his mother. Their eyes met briefly before she was led away. In the 3 weeks between verdict and sentencing, both prosecution and defense teams prepared their final arguments regarding Meredith's punishment. The conviction for felony domestic assault with a hate crime enhancement carried a potential sentence of 5 to 15 years in state prison, with the prosecution pushing for the maximum term. Meanwhile, the case had sparked broader conversations about racial identity, prejudice, and deception in intimate relationships. Legal experts appearing on national news programs discussed the unprecedented nature of the case, how it exposed a form of racism that operated not through overt rejection, but through objectification, fetishization, and selective acknowledgement of racial identity. Dr. Amara Wilson, a sociologist specializing in race and intimate relationships at the University of Texas at Austin, published an opinion piece in a major newspaper contextualizing the case within broader patterns of racial dynamics in American society. The Turner case exposes what many people of color have long experienced: relationships where their racial identity is treated as optional, something to be acknowledged or ignored according to a partner's convenience, Wilson wrote. This selective engagement with race represents a modern form of prejudice that is often harder to identify than traditional racism, but no less harmful to its victims. On social media, the hashtag #YourTurnerCase became a forum for people sharing similar experiences of partners who had fetishized or selectively acknowledged their racial identities. The conversation expanded beyond the specific details of Blake and Meredith's relationship to address broader issues of authenticity and honesty in how Americans discuss and navigate race. On July 12, 2023, the courtroom was again filled to capacity for Meredith Turner's sentencing hearing. The proceedings began with victim impact statements, starting with Blake Turner, who approached the podium with quiet dignity. "I spent almost 2 years of my life with someone who never truly saw me," Blake stated, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his expression. "Meredith didn't just assault me physically on March 12th. She had been assaulting my identity, my heritage, and my family connections throughout our relationship." Blake described the psychological impact of discovering that his marriage had been built on deliberate deception. "I've questioned everything. My judgment, my perceptions, my worth. I've had to rebuild my sense of self from the ground up. The physical wounds healed quickly. The other damage will take much longer to repair." He concluded by addressing Meredith directly, though she kept her gaze fixed forward, avoiding eye contact. "I don't hate you, Meredith. I pity you. You missed the opportunity to know and love a real person because you couldn't see past your own prejudices. That's a punishment in itself." Wesley Parker and Blake's parents also delivered statements, describing how Meredith's actions had affected the entire family and emphasizing the ripple effects of identity-based deception and violence. When given the opportunity to speak before sentencing, Meredith Turner finally addressed the court. Her statement revealed little of the remorse or self-reflection the judge might have been looking for. "I never intended to hurt anyone," she said, her voice controlled. "I genuinely believed I had moved beyond the limitations of my upbringing. If I deceived Blake, I was also deceiving myself about who I was and what I was capable of accepting." The statement struck many observers as continuing to center her experience, rather than acknowledging the harm she had caused. A final demonstration of the self-absorption that had characterized her actions throughout the relationship. Judge Weston listened to all statements without interruption before delivering her decision. With over 20 years on the bench, she had developed a reputation for thoughtful, measured sentencing that balanced punishment with rehabilitation potential. "Ms. Turner," Judge Weston began, "this court has rarely encountered a case where deception and prejudice were so deliberately woven into the fabric of an intimate relationship. Your actions reflect not momentary failure, but sustained choice. Choices made day after day to maintain a facade that served your preferences while denying your husband's full identity." The judge referenced the extensive evidence of premeditation and pattern, noting that the assault on March 12th represented not an aberration, but the culmination of long-standing attitudes and behaviors. "While I accept that your upbringing may have exposed you to prejudiced views, you are an educated adult who made conscious choices," Judge Weston continued. "The psychological evaluations provided to this court show no evidence of diminished capacity or inability to distinguish right from wrong. Rather, they suggest someone who deliberately compartmentalized uncomfortable truths to maintain a preferred narrative." After weighing mitigating factors, including Meredith's lack of prior criminal history, against the severity and calculated nature of her actions, Judge Weston sentenced her to 4 years in state prison, with eligibility for parole after serving 2 years. Additionally, she ordered Meredith to complete 500 hours of community service with organizations focused on racial reconciliation following her release, as well as mandatory participation in a rehabilitation program addressing prejudice and alcohol abuse. "It is this court's hope," Judge Weston concluded, "that you will use this time to genuinely confront the attitudes and beliefs that led to these actions and to develop the capacity for authentic relationships based on truth rather than convenient fiction." As Meredith was led from the courtroom to begin serving her sentence at the Mountain View Women's Correctional Facility, the Turner case reached its legal conclusion, but its impact continued to reverberate through Dallas and beyond. In the months following the sentencing, Blake Turner gradually rebuilt his life. He returned to full-time work at Dallas Methodist Hospital, where he was promoted to nurse manager of the emergency department in October 2023. With the support of his family and a trauma-informed therapist, he began to process the complex emotions surrounding his marriage and its dissolution. By December 2023, Blake had become involved with a support group for survivors of domestic violence, particularly focusing on men who often found fewer resources available to them. His willingness to share his experience publicly while maintaining appropriate boundaries helped others recognize and leave manipulative or abusive relationships. In February 2024, nearly a year after the assault, Blake took his advocacy a step further by partnering with the Dallas Coalition Against Hate to develop educational programs about identity-based manipulation and violence. The initiative specifically addressed how prejudice can manifest in intimate relationships through subtle behaviors like selective acknowledgement, fetishization, and compartmentalization. "What happened to me isn't just about domestic violence or even just about racism," Blake explained in his first public interview, given to raise awareness for the program. "It's about the harm caused when someone's identity is treated as optional, acknowledged when convenient, ignored when challenging. By sharing my experience, I hope others might recognize these patterns before they escalate to violence." The program, titled Seeing the Whole Person, was implemented in Dallas County schools and community centers beginning in April 2024, with plans for expansion throughout Texas by 2025. Blake's willingness to transform his painful experience into education for others earned him recognition from community leaders and advocacy organizations. Meanwhile, Pearson & Walsh, the law firm where Meredith had worked, faced its own reckoning. The trial testimony had revealed that several colleagues had been aware of Meredith's problematic comments and behaviors, but had not addressed them. In response to public pressure and internal reflection, the firm implemented comprehensive diversity and inclusion training and established clear reporting mechanisms for discriminatory behavior. Tanya Reid, Meredith's friend and confidant whose testimony had proven crucial to the prosecution's case, published a reflective essay in August 2023 about her role as a passive enabler of Meredith's prejudiced viewpoints. "By listening without challenging, by offering advice on how to avoid uncomfortable situations rather than confronting the underlying prejudice, I became complicit," Reid wrote. "This case has forced me to examine my own responsibility as a bystander and the importance of active allyship." As for Meredith Turner, she maintained a low profile during her incarceration. According to prison officials, she initially resisted participation in the rehabilitation programs ordered by the court, but gradually began to engage with them by early 2024. Whether this represented genuine self-reflection or strategic compliance remains unclear. The Turner case, with its complex intersection of intimate partner violence, racial deception, and identity manipulation, became a case study in law schools and sociology programs across the country. It prompted important conversations about how prejudice evolves and adapts, manifesting in ways that can be harder to identify, but no less damaging than more overt forms of racism. By September 2024, 18 months after the assault that exposed Meredith Turner's carefully constructed facade, the legal proceedings had concluded, but the ripple effects continued. In Dallas and beyond, people became more attuned to the subtle ways identity can be manipulated in relationships, more willing to engage in authentic conversations about race, and more aware of the importance of seeing and accepting the whole person in intimate partnerships. For Blake Turner, the journey toward healing continued. "I'll never be grateful for what happened," he reflected in a journal entry shared as part of an educational resource, "but I've found meaning in using this experience to help others. There's power in reclaiming your narrative, in refusing to let someone else's prejudice define your story." As Blake moved forward with his advocacy work and professional success, the Turner case remained a powerful reminder of the importance of authenticity in relationships and the ongoing work of confronting prejudice in all its evolving forms, a legacy of awareness and education emerging from one night when a carefully constructed facade finally shattered, revealing the truth that had been there all along.